All right, YouTube, it's time for a follow-up video to my video on the subject of human development, extraterrestrials, and so forth, because this is another thing. If you've studied linguistic anthropology, you probably understand some of this already. I studied anthropology. I enjoy it, actually. Unlike a lot of things that I studied when I was in college, anthropology was actually interesting, sort of the history of humanity as a whole. It goes beyond that. It ties in with, evolution for other species too. The use of other things. You can talk about entheogens and shamanism and stuff, how people have sort of developed with some of these various substances they encountered, ethnobotany and so forth. And it's all very interesting. The rise of human order from very, very primitive stages up through the modern day and the advances we're making now. What I say, though, is that all human development that's post-genetic, that is, it's not the result just of dumb, slow, natural selective forces over time. It's all communicative. Now, how would I illustrate this? Think about gestures for a moment. When I speak here on camera, I make gestures. I'm illustrating an important point. I'm making some sweeping declaration. What I think, and this is not in a vacuum within linguistic anthropology, is that the way in which we gesture, we can sort of reverse engineer it to the earlier stages of hominid development. In the early period of man developing, we're talking, in many cases, we're talking pre-Homo sapiens, we're talking about the direct human lineage back through to genetically distinct enough life forms that they weren't what we would consider modern humans at all. The only way to communicate something was through mimicry and through replication. The only way to directly communicate was gestural in nature. That is, the groups that survived and replicated and spread were those that had a gestural language. We actually see this among chimpanzees. They have hundreds of distinct gestures, some of which are a synthesis of other gestures for basic ideas and concepts. They can't necessarily fully vocalize many concepts. Human order also relied upon the ability, literally our speaking abilities, to actually create what you would consider the first vocalized proto-languages. I'll get into that as far as the Archaic period goes. As far as the pre-Archaic period, when we're talking about purely primitivistic hominids that are really more close to animals than they are to modern man, the only way that an idea could spread is for an individual. I used the idea of the hand axe. Well, one individual took the rock and threw it or smashed it down or something and realized that the little point on the end, the little edge, was sharp. Oh, well, this is interesting. I cut myself. Look at this strange fluid dripping from me. I've injured myself. Wonder what'll happen if I bash Erg over there in the head with this. And so the basic idea took hold. The only way, though, that those behaviors could be replicated was for one individual to physically show other individuals how it was accomplished. Essentially, Edith the cave woman took the rock and handed another rock to Erg, said, smash, smashes the rock on another, and an edge is created. And then in hopes of causing Erg to replicate that behavior, the basic idea then was formed of spreading a technology, an idea from one person to another, one being to another, one hominid to another. But there was no vocal language at the time in order to fully externalize the idea. I believe, I hypothesize, that the first true word of the first human proto-language that ended up taking hold and developing to today was probably some sort of word that simply meant do this or mimic me. It was essentially a form of request or demand. It wouldn't have been a description of other things. It would have literally been nothing more than a command. There were already gestures to describe basic things, like, oh, this means danger. That means there's food over there. This means something. This means I've got to go take a shit behind the tree or something like that. Gestures are already in chimpanzees. In fact, if we look at the chimp lineage right now, there are now chimpanzees that are coexisting with wild dogs in parts of Africa and actually give them like leftover scraps. They've already formed a symbiote relationship with groups of dogs. What we're seeing is the rudiments of an archaic civilization developing among chimpanzees. Now, I have to believe, I think that we're evolving chimpanzees to the limit of their mental capabilities anyway, by interacting with them. They're observing humans, which are similar enough probably for them to approach the uncanny valley, and they're replicating our behaviors through the same mimicry that caused the rise of human order in those early periods of time. Chimpanzees are capable of using a stick to grab termites, but now they're also capable of apparently quasi-domesticating dogs. They're actually becoming sentient life forms. If their vocalization capabilities were greater, they'd probably already be approaching the Paleolithic era, so to speak. They would become, over time, they would be selected for intellect, and they would become a distinct sentient species of sorts, be a little bit like Planet of the Apes or something. And that could happen. Take a few tens of thousands of years, just give them time and they'll develop through selective forces. So first humans had to develop the behavior of mimicry. Now this is innate within animals anyway. Animals mimic one another. But to be able to cause others to mimic was very important. That's what leads to the rise of the first proto-cultures in the world. It's a communicative thing. It's gestural in nature because it's literally, it's a physical action that is requested to be mimicked in some form. And the first way of communicating, hey, you should do this, was just physical gestures. Like, oh, smash the rock against another rock. Woohoo, now weapon for killing cave bear, something like that. The next arising order within humans, the next distinct epoch requires vocalization, though. Now you don't need to physically cause another individual to mimic you in a very limited way. Now you can vocalize it. You could teach, hundreds of other hominids how to do something. The concept of teaching directly, the concept of cause and effect is externalized, as I've said. What happens is that the rise of vocal communication of a more than very rudimentary level eclipses gestures because it's capable of being more complex. It's capable of teaching more complex ideas. It's capable of giving a person the ability at some distance to communicate as well. A key evolutionary advantage when you're living in a world that's surrounded by potentially, hostile animals that want to predate upon you, prey that may, have better sensory faculties than you, and you need to coordinate to some degree to kill the woolly mammoth or the cave bear or the dire wolf or saber-toothed tiger, something like that. No, let's go hunt some beavers, let's go hunt some moles, and then turn them into clothing and eat the rest of them. And so you needed vocalization, specifically complex enough vocalization to actually communicate the idea of cause and effect. The idea of you should replicate this behavior. The idea of this is the outcome of certain actions. Those can't be gestured for. Those are incapable of being conveyed easily enough through gestures. You'd have to have an entire language. It'd be like sign language or something. And sign language comes after vocalization within the human order. We've sort of brought back gestures specifically for people who happen to be deaf. Rather interesting. And it's capable of being understood very easily once a person has learned sign language, just like any other language. It's capable of being as efficient, but is it really in a physical sense? No, it's a lot quicker to speak than to gesture and so forth. That's a stand-in for a physical disability. So for the archaic epoch to exist at all, you needed individuals to have both the mental faculties to understand, and they had this before they were even halfway decent hominids, so that wasn't a problem. They already had the mental faculty. They needed to have the understanding of these concepts and now the vocal ability to convey them. And thus, human order rises from the very primitive stages up through the mid and late Paleolithic with the first significant technological advances made and into the Copper Age. Post-Copper Age, what you're getting is antiquity. You're getting a totally different epoch. The reason why I broke things down into 4 successive epochs is specifically based on communication within my own text on this subject. And I've got 1 section left to write, by the way, just a quick update. Instead of breaking it down into potentially dozens of different eras based on technology, I said what led to the rise of those technologies. 4 distinct stages of human communication that were required for them to actually exist. So when antiquity takes hold, you're talking about written language. Now it's possible for somebody in one tribe in the Italian peninsula to develop an idea, write it down, and for a person across the Mediterranean basin in Carthage or down in Egypt to adapt that idea if they understand the language, because it's capable of being written. It no longer requires the human. It's fully externalized. And then in the final and this leads to the rise of various technologies. What you have is, before, one tribe would develop ideas, outcompete others, and begin growing and spreading, and migration would happen. A tribe can only be at a certain density because of the technology they had, so it would schism at times, and slowly these different groups that had the idea of these advancements before, in the primitive or archaic stage, simply outcompeted the others. Now, though, you don't necessarily need that. Now all you have to have is translators, or at least an understanding of the basic tenets of a language, and you can absorb ideas directly. Ideas begin to flow more than people do. And this then leads to more human flow as well, because, of course, it affects the way in which people transport themselves. You're going, over the course of a few thousand years, you're going from nothing more complex than a simple canoe made out of a tree trunk to Greek and Roman triremes. And then, very shortly thereafter, to galleons and frigates. And then, on a human span, relatively shortly thereafter, to the modern era, where we're using aircraft carriers and battleships and tankers of almost unimaginable size, made of quite complex alloys and materials, which are capable of communicating with land 1,000 miles away effortlessly through electronic technology. So through antiquity, it's the rise of written language that matters. So for the first period, it's gestural. It's essentially, we have developed the concept, the actual idea of causing another individual to mimic a behavior. Very simple technologies, thus, are now possible to spawn, appropriately. In the archaic period, it's vocal. And it's more complex because it's vocal. It's now possible to more specifically describe what to do. It's possible to do so to larger groups of people. Instead of anyone within view of you, you can do it to a whole crowd of people, the whole tribe if you want to. You just sit in the middle of them and begin vocalizing the ideas that you're having. And this goes along with the gestures, which are still here. I'm still gesturing right now. It's a vestigial evolutionary trait that will presumably always be with us, illustrating a point in a physical sense, because for millions of years that was all we could do to communicate with one another. In the modern era, though, it goes from just a written language to an electronic format of communication, which is now totally instantaneous. It can communicate complex ideas in writing, or now in sound and in video form, all across the world. When I upload this video, there's a very high degree of chance that people in the middle of nowhere in the third world will watch this video. People in Africa will see this video. People in Europe will see this video. People in Asia, people everywhere all over the world will see this video. It's not limited to people just of one group. Anyone who can understand the language can see me speaking and gesturing here. That's more complex than just a scroll that has to be physically passed around. It's fully externalized. In the first stage, it's purely physical. In the archaic stage, it's still more or less, you have to be there in order to witness it, but it's not entirely physical. It's not some tangible, visible gestures that are happening. It's audio-based. It's a spoken language. In the period of antiquity, it's externalized to man, but it's still physical in the sense that it is a very tangible object that has to be read, or a diagram that has to be studied, picture, something like that. In the final, most recent stage, the developed stage of human evolution, communication takes the form of the more or less intangible. Yes, you're still using a physical object to access that information, but it's just a bunch of zeros and ones zipping across, across your Wi-Fi signal, essentially, through some server somewhere. It's more or less intangible. It can be stored anywhere in the world and retrieved anywhere else that has access to those electronic systems. And this starts with the telegraph. The telegraph is transmitting information faster than a human can actually move, by horse and buggy or by foot back then, and then later on by automobile, very slow, Stanley Steamer style automobiles, Model T or something like that. Some crank engine that you had to put a fire underneath the engine to warm it up on a cold day or something before it would even start. That very primitive physical human movement is totally subjugated to the early electronic age. It's much, much faster. It's still physical writing that you're communicating with, but it's possible to transmit it much more efficiently. Anything that increases the complexity or the speed of transmission leads to new epochs, if it's substantial enough. And that's what we're doing now. The next stage, the fifth epoch that I predict, the epoch of robotics that are essentially semi-sentient, simply need us to maintain them and to supply them with energy and enough efficiency to be, worth our while to actually use. That has to do with storage. It has to do with the complete externalization into what is essentially a new synthetic life form of human communication. We'll still be able to communicate with them directly through gestures, through language, through writing, and through the electronic era's various advances. That's true. But it'll be held externally to our own will in some cases. It's a physical overhaul. It's the rise of new life forms. In a relatively short period of time, mankind has gone from creating nothing more advanced than some mud brick fortified, 5-foot tall walls to keep in livestock, to building the things that we have around us today, to being able to communicate instantly with anybody. It's a drastic rate of rise that did not take that many generations to come about. We are not talking in a human span of time about very long ago that humans were still hunting with stone-tipped spears or hand axes. Most of human history took place long before that. We're talking millions of years of hominids having nothing more than a hand axe and some flint chips, and maybe marginal grasp of how to create fire in order to cook food or keep warm on a cool night or something. Most of human history comes before that. The period after that is significantly shorter. And if we go back to the pre-industrial era, we're talking about a few seconds of the human 24-hour clock dedicated to modernity, with everything else coming before that being completely pre-industrial. It's not automated. People are still using predominantly, again, stone, wood, and simple metallic alloys to create everything that they're ever using. They have a basic grasp of chemistry. They have a basic grasp of biology. They have a basic grasp of cause and effect, ultimately, compared with today. So when I wrote this, I broke things up according to the epochs of communication within a linguistic system. I didn't break it up according to different sets of technology, because some of those sets of technology, they're simply spin-offs and advancements using the same form of communication within the same communicative epoch as the other technologies that came before it. Like when we talk about antiquity, yes, there's a difference between the sort of technology that was employed at the height of the Egyptian Empire as opposed to the Roman Republic with some of the advances it made. Or certainly the Renaissance. You're talking about, clockwork and early pre-automation, stuff like that. Automation. But they're still part of the same epoch within communication. The same general technologies are used. The only argument you can make is the printing press. Well, that certainly helps with the transmission of ideas more efficiently, but is it fundamentally different from books that were being copied by hand, or is that simply the result of a development that was created through the same communicative means? And I say the latter. It was created under the same set of communication principles. It's just a technological advancement subjugated to it that in turn made it easier to spread around that same general technology that has to do with external communication, has to do with books specifically, to make them quicker to produce in larger numbers at far less cost. Important technology, but it didn't bring about the rise technically of a new epoch. All the social and political and religious overhauls that it spawned are, again, still spread around using the same basic idea of technology, which is a written language. And so there's just a little bit about that. Some people are probably like, what? What are you talking about? Others are probably like, oh, well, that's interesting. Yeah, I just wanted to create a video on that subject. Figured it'd be a good first video of the day. Something really wake your mind up by thinking about science as opposed to current events. It's like it's already there. It's already been described. Whereas this, it requires a little bit of theory. It requires a little bit of deeper thought, I suppose. That's about all. Peace out.